if Tim Ferriss changed my life, I sort of now have like a responsibility to do the same thing. And like what's crazy is that I started to create content like pretty consistently, like every day, starting from like 2018. And like since then, I've met other like past mini versions of me. Earlier this year or like last year, I don't remember. Some like random guy invited me on his podcast. He was like literally a college student. He had a podcast that had like over 150 episodes. This guy's been grinding for years. And like he literally told me that like I changed his life and like I helped him realize this and that. And it's like I've met so many people like that, where it's just like I understand that like I'm just like a force of nature. The same way that Tim Ferriss is a force of nature. Like we're all here together, constantly like pushing the world forward, pushing people's lives forward so that they can push other people's lives forward. And you know what I mean? And so that's like part of the beauty of life. And it's honestly like one of the few things that motivates me.
Win all in, play my cards right. Up the ante, one blackjack all night. Roll the dice, let it ride. Water the odds, I got snake eyes.
This is Entrepreneur Perspectives, introspective podcast conversations with and for entrepreneurs. This podcast is produced by the team at CastSource. If you are looking to start a podcast, appear on podcasts, or create original content, go to castsource.com, or you can DM me on Twitter at Eric_Kaz. In this conversation, I'm joined again by the author of Screw Being Shy, Mark Metry. Mark is an important voice for mental health. He is the host of the Social Anxiety Society podcast. He's a 2-time TEDx speaker, and he is someone who has dealt with social anxiety, and today he helps people manage their social anxiety. He does this through his book, Screw Being Shy, talks, posts, conversations, and coaching. In this episode with Mark Metry, we take on topics like how podcasting saved Mark's life, how creating content changed Mark's life, and how clothes are the ultimate icebreaker. Real quick before we get started, KazTM is our content production company. Why content? It's simple. Content brings people together. I've seen it play out over and over, and I want to help others explore and discover this for themselves. The experience is totally worth it. Learn more at KazTM.com. We focus on podcasts and writing, one piece of content at a time. It all starts with conversations, just like this one.
When I go on podcasts, like I don't have like a script, you know, obviously like I have like my book and my podcast and things like that, but I don't follow like an order. I always just try to like be my honest self, you know, and like just one of the biggest motivations for me is just like, I hope that one day when I'm like 35 or 45, I can like look back at the podcast that I've been on almost as like who I was as a snapshot, you know? So for me, that's my motivation. And personally for me, like right now, I have like so many different things happening in my personal life that like the whole story about myself is like changing. So I'm just like, I don't want to rush. Like, I don't want to be like, oh, I have to market this. And I'd rather take my time because I've made that mistake before and I'm really not in a rush. So
it's like putting yourself in a box almost when you do that. I've done the same thing, and you can go back and like listen to yourself or read what you wrote either way. And you'd almost be like cringe. But then I think there's something to like accept that you're allowed to change how you feel about something, like your opinion on a matter, or like what you think about your business or what your next steps are. Because I think so many people are like, well, you said this 3 years ago. Like, well, that was 3 years ago. You know, I was hearing, this is funny. My son was just telling me this. He was out for the 4th of July and he's in high school now, right? And someone was saying like, I remember when he was like, did this in 6th grade. Like he was in middle school, right? Like he's still the same person, but you're a different person. And like, we have to accept the fact that the people are going to change. And you would hope, I was like, man, I would hope you have changed a little bit since middle school, right? Like all of us should hope that, anybody, right? So I think there's so much held on to, you felt this way at this point that you have to hold firmly on that belief, or like you've just given up and you've given into something, which is just so not true.
Exactly, dude. Yeah. I'm totally with you. And like, for example, for me, like a huge part of me that I'm like trying to, that like I haven't really put in like the public eye, but like I'm trying to get it out there more, is like I love making music. I love rapping, you know? So like, for example, what I did is like with my new podcast, every episode of my podcast starts off where I like do a freestyle rap about my guests and like about what we end up talking about, you know? And like, that's so fun and people are seeming to love it, you know? So like, and I've been working on that for like years, you know? So it takes time. And I think the biggest thing is just being patient and just like understanding that like everyone's at a different age and like there's no rushing to like fit this image of yourself because it's a constant journey. like every day.
Yeah. How could you? I mean, that's what these conversations are for, because you could show up and have these thoughts in your head and you could have a conversation with someone. And just through that, let's say hour-long conversation, it might give you these new thoughts on something. Like, so that's what the conversations are for. If it was just so I could state my facts and my beliefs and that's it, and I could do that with you and I could do that with 100 other people, like, what's the point? It iterates, right? Like you're constantly going and changing and iterate all those things. Well, I like that. I mean, that's why I think these long form conversations have a place. Well, then even going on to your rap thing, like that takes courage too. Like that's you saying like, I'm going to,
For real, bro.
You could totally sound like an idiot, right? To somebody, what does it matter? Because you've gone through that.
Yeah. And like literally like in my rap, like literally, I just put one out on my Instagram today. I am my podcast. And like one of the lines in my rap, it's something like thinking back to the days before the magic, daydreaming like I gotta have it. Even if they laugh at it, years later, I'm laughing at them because I grabbed it. They stole their soul and they trapped it. So like what I'm trying to say is that like even if people laugh at me, like I don't really care, because if they laugh at me, I'm just gonna keep going on doing it and doing it and doing it. And then years later, I'm gonna be like 1,000 times more successful, better, sound like whatever it is. While they sat and spent their time just hating on people. And rather than like find out what for them makes them tick, they have replaced that with like hatred and trolling on people. That's a very real thing. A lot of people live their lives like that. And like, that's why they're miserable. Like I literally know people who say that they're musical artists or they say they're this or say they're that, but they haven't put out anything. And then I go to their social media and they're literally just hating on other people. And it's like, yeah, literally why. And like, I'm not even judging them. Like I've literally been in that same spot. I totally understand that mindset of like when you hate your life so much and you get so cynical and nihilistic about life itself that you just try to drag other people down, because when you see them do something, that triggers like an internal part of you that's like, oh, wow, look at them having fun. Look at them being creative. Look at them expressing their talent. And then it reflects on them, but they can't do that, or they feel like they can't do that. So instead they just take that hatred and that frustration on not being able to do what they do on other people. It's crazy. I don't know if that made sense, but like, it's crazy.
It makes a lot of sense. There's an awareness, like from your side, to know that you're going to create this, that you're going to have these people feel this way, that it might create some emotions for yourself. There's a lack of awareness for other people to see that they're going to this path to troll you, let's say, or whoever that person is. And there's nothing you can do about that, because that's not your problem. That's a them problem. When you put your heart into something, you risk having your heart broken, right? Whether it's a relationship, whether it's your business,
sure,
whether it's, I mean, it could be as basic as like rooting for a sports team. Like there's people out there that get very invested in you live in Boston, right? Like people love the Celtics, and the Celtics just
it's a
lost.
religion, bro.
Yeah. And there's different ways to look at it. And that's kind of cool, like that you can invest yourself into that. If you don't take yourself in that too seriously, because you have zero control over it, like it doesn't matter how loud you are in the crowd, like it doesn't impact it, right? Maybe a touch if you add up thousands of voices. Anyway, but when you put your heart into that, you risk losing something. Again, that's a very basic level. Like obviously relationships and loved ones are like the extreme. And it's like, man, but when you do that, it's just better that way, I feel like personally, but it creates for more aching without a doubt. But it's like when you can get to that point like that you're talking about, where you're willing to create and willing to share, because it's not necessarily for that person. Not necessarily, it's not for that person. It's mostly probably for yourself and those people that are very close to you and those people that you're trying to impact, what you're trying to do. You're trying to help a community of people that have social anxiety or maybe not even know that they do. And like, if it resonates with that person that you're talking to or you're writing to, what does it matter if this person over here has got something negative to say about it? Like they're just getting in the way. And it's only getting worse. I mean, just social media is an amazing tool. Like you and I are not talking if not for social media right now. It's also an amazing negative tool when you just open it up and just like, it is so divisive and you could say something and people are just hating on you like immediately. And that could just wear someone out.
For real. I know there have definitely been times where it's worn me out. And, I think at the end of the day, like, I think you got to like, no matter what, like you always got to take care of your mental health. But I think like different parts of life will push you to do what you got to do. You know, like for example, for me, I totally had my heart broken earlier this year. I got out of a relationship. It was very brutal. It was very terrible. But I honestly look back at that and I'm like, I think that's actually the reason why I decided to relaunch my podcast and like put my music out there. And like really what happens is that you're filled with like so much pain that you don't know what to do. And of course, like I went to therapy and I've been like meditating like 3 times a day and doing all these things. But it's also like when you're in that world of pain and you have no hope, you don't see a way out, then you start to look for new things that you can do that are going to help you feel better, you know? And so that for me was like part of expressing myself. And then I also like look back at like literally like the worst time in my life in like 2015, where I was like obese and suicidal and depressed. And like that terrible moment in my life ended up setting the stage for my success in my career years later. And the same thing I went through, I'm sure like this year is going to do the same thing for the future. But it's hard though, because like there's this other song that I like by this rapper named Big Sean. I don't even know what he says, but he says something like rock bottom is a bottomless pit. There's always going to be someone more at the bottom. And like, if you don't realize that you're there, you can even go more and more and more to the bottom. And like, dude, I honestly, this past year, I honestly spent like months suffering, like literally so depressed, like not knowing what to do, like literally just not wanting to do anything, didn't go on social media, didn't post anything, didn't talk to anybody. And I sort of like caught myself in that moment where I'm like, Mark, like if this keeps happening again and again and again, and every day turns into the same days that happened last week, and then the last week turns into a month, then like you're going to keep falling down this like downwards hole, like this downward spiral. It's very possible. This happens to so many people in life. They get hit with like one major adversity and it like sets off a chain reaction. And then they end up having like mental health problems, addiction problems as a result of that. Their family gets messed up, their job, they lose their money, like so many different things. You know what I mean? And it's very, very hard. It's very, very hard. I experienced a version of that this year. And I almost thought that I wasn't going to make it out, if I'm being dead honest. But then I had to like talk to my friends. I had to seek help. I had to get therapy. I had to do some of the things that got me here, but I also had to do totally radically different things and new things. And I almost didn't make it out. So like I totally see people who were in that same spot. And now thankfully I'm out of it. It's been like months and months of work. And it's, I honestly feel like I've never been happier in like the last 2-3 years of my life. And it's dope. It's honest. I'm so grateful, but I bled so much. Like there's so much pain and so many people are like stuck in that pain every single day. And it's like, you have to push through that pain and use that pain to push you to the next level of life. It's very hard, but it's possible.
Yeah. Yeah. I was listening to you, right? It's something you wrote. It's either in Twitter, it could have been your book. And you've mentioned this, and I wanted to bring it up last time. And you going down this path right now, what you just talked about. And we're on a podcast, right? We're recording something, but you were listening to podcasts and you said, podcasts saved your life. Like, I know that's just not like in a line, like obviously that's part of it. And there's so much more to it. Like you said, like just even what you're going through right now. It's interesting because I remember a time when I started listening to podcasts and I was having a lot of thoughts in my head and I was like talking to myself, and I saw podcasts as a way, whether it was like, whatever it was, it didn't matter what the content was at the time. It was some of it self-help, let's say, or say it was like early on type of listening where I've developed and gone on a different like content that I listen to now. And I saw the importance of podcasting and listening to it and then audiobooks and reading, all that stuff. And then I was like, became a reason as one of the reasons why, I'm not going to get into it now, but like why I created my own podcast, because I saw the importance of it. But when I hear you say that line of someone who's gone through it and is on the other end of it and is living it out, to drop that line of podcast saved your life, like talk to me about that. Like that's a big one.
Yeah, it's huge, man. I literally remember, I'm not even joking, the first podcast that I remember listening to in my entire life was an episode from Tim Ferriss talking about how he was suicidal in college. And I was literally at the time suicidal in college. And so when I listened to that, I don't even remember what he said, but like he said like kind of how he did it and how he approached it and then what happened in his life. And I just like remember being taken out of my moment where I was suicidal and my brain was having all these thoughts. I just like remember being taken out and be like, wait, I'm in this spot right now in my life. And yet I'm listening to a podcast by a guy who is now very successful, but was in the same exact spot that I was in. And like, I literally had no idea what to do with my life. I was so lost, but I literally remember I literally remember just like literally spending the rest of my days and weeks literally just listening to Tim Ferriss's podcast, listening to Joe Rogan's podcast on YouTube, Aubrey Marcus. Like I literally remember, dude, I literally sat in my college dorm room. Like, I had a roommate and the lights were off and like we had the neon lights that like changed colors. And like we both be sitting and like we both had our beds on opposite ends. And I just like have Joe Rogan's podcast. And like we just be like learning the craziest stuff. And it completely changed my life. Like it completely changed like what I thought was possible, completely changed like what you said, like my own like inner dialogue, just of like not hearing myself and hearing someone else talk. That's educational, that's informational, that's inspirational. Completely changed my life, dude. Completely changed my life. And then also too, like what changed my life is like, I remember like at this time, even though I was going through it, I had no idea like what mental health was. Like I didn't understand the concept of even like being unhealthy. Like I didn't understand these things, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I remember I was just like, you know what? But then like at that time, I realized that I was an entrepreneur. Like even before when I was a kid on as a teenager, I like start all these websites. I do all these different things online. But I was like raised in a world where it's like, oh, you have to get good grades or you have to be good at sports or else you're a loser. And so for me, I was always an entrepreneur. And so I kind of like learned that too, that I was an entrepreneur. And I literally like remember going to Spotify and like literally searching entrepreneur. And then coming across like, I remember it was like an entrepreneur, like motivational playlist. And I remember clicking on it. And I remember just like listening to like all like these different like motivational tracks from like all these different speakers. And dude, I literally remember my brain being blown. Like I remember at that time, I had never heard these different ideas of like believing in, like I'd never heard of these things. And I just like literally started to, if I was inside, I was watching a podcast. If I wasn't inside, I would be outside going for a walk. And on my walks, I'd literally be listening to podcasts or I'd be listening to those motivational tracks. And I literally did that for a year, like straight up every single day. Didn't matter, like every day. And like, dude, that fundamentally changed my life. Like it fundamentally changed how I think about things. I also like started to do like this thing where I don't know how much this is based off like science. Like I don't know how much science there is, but I started doing this thing called like self-hypnosis, where like basically what I learned is that like your brain has like two sort of modes. There's your conscious mind, then there's your subconscious mind. And the only way that you can access your subconscious mind is when you're asleep. And so basically like what I learned is that when you're asleep, your subconscious mind is open and it's thinking, you're dreaming, you're going through all these different ideas. And so like what I learned is that your brain is actually unbelievably more receptive and open. And so I literally started to like listen to like these 8-hour self-hypnosis tracks when I would go to sleep. And like, I don't know how much that did, but I definitely think that impacted me a lot because, you know, it was that. And then plus I started to meditate. I started to eat healthy. I just like literally became a different person. Like every inch of my mind looked different. Every inch of my body looked different. And, you know, throughout the years, sure, there's been times where I've lost momentum, especially in 2020 and 2021 for sure. But that's what I did, man. And it's like so many other people have done kind of the same journey, same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing that podcasts have this ability of like this access to information that we have. I mean, obviously it goes in different directions because you can consume the wrong information, right? And you could go down the wrong path, right? So again, it's not always like, it goes back to that word awareness and you realizing that this is worthwhile and you can go down this path and what this is doing for you. And you can't spreadsheet that, right? Like there's no ROI on that. And because that's what I constantly hear, right? So we do podcast production and a lot of times we'll come across these, let's say a CEO or someone in finance that wants to know what they're going to get out of the podcast. You know, like, and I could look at ours and be like, Mark, I'm talking to you right now. Like, I've seen what you put out there. I've seen your book. I've seen your talks. I've paid attention to you. We've communicated before. And I'm like, I get to talk to you and hear all this information. What's the ROI on that? Who gives a shit? Right? Like I get to have this conversation with you and learn all of these things.
I bet they must love you when you say that.
Well, and I do because I don't care because if that's what they're looking for, it won't be a good relationship. It doesn't mean that the return isn't somewhere out there and that return, maybe you just can't even define what that looks like. There's so much to it and like impacting someone like yourself so you can then help. There's just so much to it, right? You could get as deep as you want because that leads you to the part of now you're sharing the content. Because you said, podcasting saved your life, creating content changed your life. And I know you've used change in this conversation already, and they can mean a lot of times the same things. But you then saying, okay, I'm going to get on the creator side of this as opposed to just the consumption. I know you're going to consume content, of course, but now you're creating content. Obviously I can understand and we can start predicting why content creation changed your life because the book you put out, the TED Talk. But like when you say that, like, what are you meaning?
Yeah. It's crazy. It's like, I feel like what moves the world forward is just other people. You know what I mean? So like what my dad, for example, like my parents, they came from Egypt to America. Like what they did is going to move my life forward. What their parents did or whoever impacted their life is going to move them forward. Like that's how the world moves forward. If we didn't have Martin Luther King and like all the people who helped start the civil rights, like, Black people would be slaves, like still, you know what I mean? Like that's just how the world works. And that's the way that I view it. So it's like, if Tim Ferriss changed my life, I sort of now have like a responsibility to do the same thing. And like, what's crazy is that I started to create content like pretty consistently, like every day, starting from like 2018. And like since then, I've met other like past mini versions of me. Earlier this year or like last year, I don't remember. Some like random guy invited me on his podcast. He was like literally a college student. He had a podcast that had like over 150 episodes. This guy's been grinding for years. And like he literally told me that like I changed his life and like I helped him realize this and that. And it's like I've met so many people like that. Where it's just like, I understand that like, I'm just like a force of nature. The same way that Tim Ferriss is a force of nature. Like we're all here together, constantly like pushing the world forward, pushing people's lives forward so that they can push other people's lives forward. And you know what I mean? And so that's like part of the beauty of life. And it's honestly like one of the few things that motivates me. And I saw this one time like in front of my eyes. Like in 2019, I think, or 20, it was like beginning of 2020, like right before COVID hit. I remember I went to a mall with my parents. And this is a mall that I don't really like go to that often, but I remember growing up in this mall and like as a kid, like running around here. But I remember just like randomly going to the mall with my parents. And I remember like this guy, maybe he's like 40, 45. I'm like walking with my parents. He like walks up to me and he's like, yo, are you Mark Metry? He's like, yo, I've been following you on LinkedIn for years. And he like literally like details this entire story in front of my parents, like, well, they're just like, what the, where literally like, he just like details on how like, he literally didn't have a job. He was suicidal. He was obese. He randomly found me on LinkedIn, started to look at my content, started to listen to my podcast, started to do the things that I did. And like literally changed his entire life. He's super healthy. He's ripped now. He had a job. He started his own company. He was literally like, dude, I'm having an audio about it. Like, I can't even believe this is you. And like, just having a moment like that and having like different moments like here and there, all that stuff has like helped affirm to me. But also at the same time, like it's very easy to forget that. Like during quarantine in 2020, when I was just inside of my house on Zoom all day, even though I was talking to other people, it's just like, it's not the same. And there were so many times where I just like completely forgot, honestly, like who I was, what I even stood for, and that's why like ever since the world started to open back up, it's been a long time. It's just made everything better, because we're getting back into like these cycles where people are helping each other and people are working with each other. Like we need that as humans. Like you can't opt out of that, even if you want to.
Yeah. What was it like? So COVID's still out there, but like when people start going back and you have social anxiety, right? And you've suffered through this in the past and you've overcome it and you've done a lot of things. And then the parties happen. You go to a restaurant, you go to whatever, you have to travel, you got to go see a few people. It's hard to reacclimate. It's almost like everyone had to reacclimate themselves with society again. And it's still going on. So I'm not trying to say it's still happening. It's going to be happening for a very long time. Like this was the first 4th of July where people could really get together. I think they were last summer, but you know what I mean? Yeah. What was it like for you? What was your experience of like the world reopening?
I think for me, like I was just like so excited. Like I was just like, oh my God, finally. I didn't really have any social anxiety per se. But what I will say is that like, as someone who like lived a life of social anxiety and I spent so much of my life by myself, like quarantine itself was traumatizing because all of a sudden my brain went back to like, hey, Mark, you're just going to sit inside your house and not talk to any of your friends, like not be with anybody. That was a lot worse than then like going out in society because it was exciting, So I think for me, it was just like, I was just like so excited. Like I was so happy. However, it was also like kind of depressing though, because like I was the speaker. And so there was like all this back and forth where like right when COVID happened, everything got canceled, all the events, everything. And then towards like the summer, like in July and August of that year, then like different states started to open things back up. But then there was like another wave of COVID and then everything shut down. So it was just like honestly like so tiring, dude. Like it was so exhausting to like deal with like, especially if you're like your career and like basically half of your income is tied to that.
Yeah.
It was so stressful to like shut down and then do other things. And then the world comes back on. But then the COVID comes back and then it shuts back down. And there was like, but you got like, I'm honestly still going through it.
Yeah. And I don't think it like just ends. And then you throw in the economy and like what's going on and the uncertainty we have with that right now. Like, you know, the markets, the gas prices. And it's not just as simple as those two things, which are always the top headlines. There's so much more going on, the layoffs, the interest rates and all of it. It creates a wave of uncertainty on the back end of everything that we all just went through over the last couple of years. And we don't know what the next couple of years are going to look like. And like you just said, like it's not over. It might be something different, right? But you have to go through it.
Yeah. Let's say this, man, I'm going to be meditating more.
Yeah, okay.
Now that looking back at it, my biggest regret throughout quarantine was not meditating enough. Like right now, I'm meditating 2 or 3 times a day. And it's just like fundamentally a completely different game changer on just how my actual life feels on a moment to moment basis to when I meditate versus when I don't meditate, right? Because when COVID first happened, like you remember like when quarantine and COVID first happened, like everybody was so motivated. Everyone was like, yeah, quarantine time, like you got to focus on your goals, you got to focus on your habits. And like, I don't know about you, but like, I think everyone kind of did that. But then after a while, I was like, yo, when the hell is this stuff going to end? Like, we're just going to live inside all day. And like, there just became a lot of like misery and a lot of not being motivated. And it was like very, very challenging. And now that I think about it, one of my biggest regrets was like, you know, whether it was like turning on the news or watching this or like waiting for the world to open, like waiting. I should have just been meditating because that's like the only thing that you can control. Not the only thing. There's other things that you can control. But when you can like sit down in a room and close your eyes for 10 to 15 minutes, it sounds like to your point before, it sounds like there's no ROI from that, right? Like it sounds like, wait, why would I just randomly sit down in my room? Like I have a family, I have a job, I have to do this and this and that. But it's like, if you can do that, your brain structure over time will change to where you perceive the world in a different way. And if you do that like once a day, and then if you really enjoy it, and like to me, I started doing it 2 to 3 times a day about like a month and a half ago because I actually had to like reset my nervous system. Complete game changer, bro. Like I feel like every day I wake up and like when I meditate, I don't meditate always first thing in the morning, but when I do, or like when I'm on this roll, like just what I can do and what my brain perceives as possible for me is just completely different than when I meditate versus when I don't meditate, you know? And so I think it just comes back to like doing those unsexy things, like doing the unsexy things that don't give you validation in the moment, like sitting down and closing your eyes. That's the key. You know what I mean? And so like, it's interesting. And like, we live in a world where, especially with quarantine, we're all on our phones. Like our phones are literally validation machines, you know? And obviously, like you said, social media is great, but also sometimes it can not be great. And also when you look at like the neurochemistry on how validation and your brain and dopamine work, like we're all running around here with like fried brains. Like our brains are completely fried from social media, from technology, from the food that we eat. So there's so many things, like our brains are completely fried. And so then we go out into the world and we're just like not mentally, psychologically equipped with what is happening in the world. I don't know about you, but like, I feel like the difficulty setting of life has gotten a lot harder these last few months, whether it's the recession or this or that. The world has definitely gotten harder. Maybe that's true. Maybe that's not true. Maybe it is true on some, you know, metrics and maybe not true on some other metrics. But it's just like, to me, I always just go back to like, I got to focus on what I can control. I got to do the things that are not going to give me validation today, because that is what's going to help level up every part of my life in the future. That's going to make me a stronger person that's more prepared to deal with the future, no matter how it looks.
Yeah. You said difficulty setting. I wrote that down. I'm like, man, that is like, that's so true. And like, the technological advances that we've had versus how how our brains have progressed, like that's not like parallel to each other. Like it just doesn't go in the same. And then like the news, the good news, the bad news, like you talked about like all this validation, all these other things, like we can't possibly keep up with all of that. And it's like you could be upset about something that happened in your community. Well, now your community is like the world and you have instant access to whatever just took place, right? And how do you like what happened? You keep bringing up 4th of July weekend when the news comes in Highland Park, Illinois, outside of Chicago, and there's a shooting and you have footage from that and you have perspective from the people that were there, that were dads were grabbing their daughters and running. Like that information is right there at your, like right away. Like there's no time wasted in between. And you can't possibly understand what they're going through, yet you have this information in front of you at that second. And man, it's just, there's so much to take in. And like you talking about meditating, you talk about like listening to podcasts, creating content. What I hear a lot of all this is like, there's this, and you talked about before, like this purpose, this bigger purpose where like there's these things that are going to happen, just without a doubt, right? Breakups and whatnot, and bad news and business deals gone bad or bad conversations or weather, COVID. What do you do about it? Like, but if you have your awareness and your purpose, and then you can get through it. I mean, you talk about, I love this, like showing up to an event with purpose, because I can't imagine a harder thing to do than someone who has social anxiety to show up to an event and you show up with a purpose. And it's funny. And I'll tell you this quick story. We're out of town. My daughter's got a dance event and we're just in this big stadium, like a big arena. And I'm walking I had to go get a water and I'm walking back. I'm from Buffalo, New York, right? So just random. We're at the beach all day and it's cold inside. So I have this hoodie and it's like a Bills hoodie and it's blue and it's just got this Bills logo. It's kind of like small, but it's there. So I'm walking back and next thing out of like way back in the distance, in the stands, and there's no dance going on at the moment. So he wasn't interrupting anything. All I hear is someone yell, "Go Bills." And it's just funny because you talked about wearing clothes as an icebreaker. And I wasn't doing it for the reason. And I thought of you, the area that I'm in is like, there's so many people from that area. There's like 7 times in the day, people are talking to me about it. Just yesterday, I was wearing something and someone referenced the clothes that I was wearing and it started this conversation, right? So I'm getting to this point of like showing up with a purpose and these different tools that you can use. And you talked about.
And what were you wearing? If you don't mind me asking.
When's this? The last time?
Yeah, like when you said the guy who sparked the conversation because of what you were wearing, like what were you wearing? Just like a shirt or what?
Oh, that was actually randomly it was a Bills hat. And this woman came over with her son. And this one was last night and we're watching the fireworks in uptown Charlotte, but we're watching from a distance and they came right next to us. And she's like, "My husband's a Bills fan." I was like, "Oh, he's from Buffalo." "No, but he grew up in the Jim Kelly era and he's got a blue car and he's got his floor mats." And it just sparked this conversation. All because of an article of clothing. And it was like, I could totally understand when maybe you wouldn't have talked, but that just opened the floodgates. And I've always said, like, there's these ultimate icebreakers. If you can find a common interest, and sports is such a basic one, right? Are you from there? No. Okay, why do you? And then it gets into who knows what. Anyway, like it goes back to, it's not about the clothes that you wear. It's just having that purpose. And there's these different tools and things that you can do. And I just love that because I think so much of what you've talked about today and when we've talked in the past is there's just this greater purpose behind it. But I think there's something to it of like showing up someplace and having a purpose and finding that other person that you can look at to be like, I want to talk to that person, right?
Yeah. Dude, I literally love everything you said. It's actually so funny that like everything you're saying right now, because I have like had this idea over like the last month that keeps coming back to me. And I think based on what you just said, I'm actually going to go for it. But like basically like one of the things that I realized I got this idea when I was like walking through the grocery store the other day. And I think it was kind of the same thing where like someone was wearing a shirt. I complimented her. I said something. We had this whole conversation. And it got me to think like, dude, the social fabric, at least like where I live in a pretty good area. I live in Massachusetts. The social fabric of America has completely deteriorated, bro. Like, I don't know if you're realizing this or like, I don't know if it's just me, but just like across like what people have been like fear-mongered with, the whole like political racism stuff. Like there's so many different things where it's like, you're afraid to talk to somebody. now. And like one of the ideas that I've had is like, dude, I'm going to start like a mental health fashion brand. So I can get people to buy these t-shirts and basically use those t-shirts as billboard to create icebreakers in like public situations that are around mental health. So like I already have like 2 designs that I'm like thinking of that I feel like would be good. But I honestly think like after what you just said, like I'm going to go for it because like I've had this idea too many times. It's a sign that I have to do it. And like what you just said, you kind of like randomly said that. Like I understand you said that in the context of social anxiety, but I feel like just the way that you said that, that's the sign that I got to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you, bro.
Yeah,
Thank
man.
you. I
Yeah.
appreciate
That's
it,
what
man.
these conversations are for, right? There's so many things. Like I think I was wearing another time, again, it's like these social things or pop culture, whatever, like Almost Famous, right? The movie Almost Famous, if you've seen it, and Stillwater's the band. I randomly have like this Stillwater shirt. So someone saw the movie and like, I remember this guy passed me and like, he just made a comment about it, right? And sports is one I always go back to because it's just, there's like, even if you're not a fan or into the sport, like you still might wear the shirt and it might be the ultimate rival, like Red Sox, Yankees. Like maybe that's an extreme, right? But it just can open the door to a conversation to someone who wouldn't necessarily open up about it. But I get it. Like it just, like a head nod. Like it doesn't always have to lead to being best friends with the person. It's just, you see the person, they see you, bob your head, right? Like Alabama fans, they walk past each other, they say roll tide. Ohio State people say OHIO, right? It's just, there's so many of these things that take place that allow for, like you're talking about, there's good people out there. And there's just those quick interactions that we have on a day-to-day basis of like smiling at someone at the grocery store. You go to your car wash and you thank them. You see a crosswalk person at the airport. Like we always assume that they're just these miserable people. Well, if you smile at them and you say something nice, they might smile back at you. And like these things that can take place. So like, you don't know what that person's going through. And like you said, like you could have this thing that said, well, this signifies something more than just me. And we can have a moment and it might lead to more than just a moment, right? And maybe it does lead to a conversation or a podcast conversation, but yeah, man, it just gets bigger, but
it's so important, dude. It's literally so important. Like, dude, I've literally become friends with almost everybody at my grocery store. Like literally everybody who works there, all the people who like shop there every week, I become friends with almost all of them. And it's a huge grocery store. It's honestly like, it's become like a community. Like, yeah. It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
And like, it's interesting because like one of the things that I started doing, I think about a month ago, is like I have this reminder that goes off of my phone every day that tells me to compliment somebody. And so like, I'll literally like be at wherever, and I'll just like try to leave someone with like some kind of, like a genuine comment. And like, dude, sometimes, people are just like, oh yeah, thanks. And they just walk away. But then other times too, like sometimes like you see people, they're just like in their own heads. Like they're in their own bubble. They're like thinking about this. They're looking down, they're doing whatever in their heads. And like you compliment them. And like sometimes what you see is like, you just see them like their bubble melts. And like you just see them like walk away and they're just like fundamentally in a different state of mind. That's happened to me personally. Like on some of my dark times throughout the months, like there've been like random times where like I've just like been walking, looking sad and depressed, and like some random person just like asked me how I was, and rather than be like, oh, good, how are you? I was like, honestly, I'm so depressed. Like, and just being honest with people. And some of them are like, oh shit, they're kind of like, they kind of stand out. But then a lot of them, other ones, like, dude, some people like sat down with me and like talked to me, and like they became my friends, and like I got their number and we talk now. You know what I mean? Like they're always like the craziest scenarios, like beautiful friendships and moments that can happen that you may have no idea how it can affect someone. And like the truth is like, this is how human beings were created to be. Like we grew up in small communities. We grew up like in villages. Like this is how our psychology was created for thousands of years. And so all of a sudden we're living in cities. We're living in areas where there's like literally hundreds of thousands of people, like too many people. Like even like what's interesting too is like you go to like New York City, right? Like biggest city in America. And you see like hundreds of people walking through the sidewalk. Bro, barely anybody's looking up. I understand, like, I'm sure they're busy. They got to look at their meeting and text this and do this and do that. Dude, everyone has got their AirPods in. They've all got the noise cancellation on. And everyone is just in their own bubble. It's like you literally see like thousands of people all together. But bro, everyone is just completely disassociated. And like, I do the same thing. Like, again, I think people should do, obviously, like whatever they want to do. Like if you're busy on your phone, do what you got to do. But it's just like really interesting to look at that. And it's like, I think that is like a prime reason as to why like so many people now are depressed and anxious, because you may have more money in your bank account, you may have more options, you may have more opportunities, but it's just like the small things, like the small social fabric, at least from my eyes, like in America, like has really deteriorated for so many people. It was already deteriorating. And then COVID, the whole political crap, like all that stuff, it's sad. Like it's honestly sad to see. And like I've honestly like had some, I can think of two. I've had like 3 social interactions that were very negative with people in the grocery store where I can tell like that other person has either like not stepped outside of their house in a long time, or they're just like going through a totally different mess and they took it out on me. So I've also seen some of those things. So it's definitely a huge problem, but I believe that like all of us individually can do it. And like I've never walked up to someone or left someone with a compliment and it's never been negative. It's never happened. You know, so those examples that I mentioned, those are like other things. So I think it's really up to us. You know, like we can't control everything, but like you can compliment one person a day.
Yeah. It's so funny you said that because it's so true. Because you know what that feels like when someone says it to you, if you can do it to somebody else. And what you're talking about is those moments. It's those small moments. It's not always these big grand things where you have to present something to somebody. It's those little moments at the grocery store or crossing the street where you eye contact with somebody, smile, like those little things do matter. Now, we could also say like, well, you could go look at pictures on the train station and people had the newspapers up and they weren't looking at each other then either. It's just to a different level because there's so much information, right? And you could just block everything out. Yeah. There's something that you brought up and I want to ask you about it because I don't have like this answer on it and I've gone all over the place with it. You've talked about immortality. and I know I just kind of like switched it on you, but
I like switching.
Yeah, it's all related, right? Because what you're talking about in these moments is just living in that moment, right? That's that conversation at the grocery store that you're having. You're not thinking about like, well, what is that going to mean for the future grandkids and, you know, when I'm not here anymore? And, you know, it's just like, don't take yourself so serious, right? That's a whole nother thing. When you show up to an event, if you feel like you've done something wrong or you got something in your teeth or you spilled something on your shirt or if I said something stupid, that is, like you said, getting caught up in your own head. And you can obviously talk more about this than I could. And I go back and forth. Like some days I'm very introverted and other days I can be extra. It just depends. And I don't know if I have it exactly like when it is or why it is. And I'm constantly thinking about it because like someone's like, well, you're out there. And other days and I'm like, I don't want to be around other people. Like, I don't know. So, but now going back on this immortality thing, like when I say that, like today, and maybe your viewpoint's changed on it because your book's been out for a while, like what are you thinking about that?
So what I think about it is that the human psyche has an understanding of the present, the past, and the future. And our human psychology knows that one day we're going to die. And there's an idea out there that says like, that is the base layer of anxiety. So like there is some part of our psyche that knows that one day we are going to die and we are going to die. So there's a part of our psychology that is terrified of that, which is why every single religion, every single successful human civilization in the world has essentially either created a story or an idea or a system about the afterlife. Hindus, they believe in reincarnation. Christians, heaven and hell. The other religions, they have their own thing. And so that's kind of the way that I think about it in terms of like, there is a base layer of our psychology that is sort of like understands this. However, we now live in a world where we live in America, we live in 2020. Religion for a lot of people is out of the picture. We don't have like a story for our society anymore for the afterlife. And so I think that this is like causing a huge amount of like existential anxiety in so many people at a surface level that they don't even know. And like the thing is too, is like, even if you are someone who you're like, oh, I'm a Christian, I believe in heaven or hell. I think there's a difference between like sort of like literally understanding something, like theoretically understanding something versus truly like understanding it in your head and in your being. And I think that's a huge thing. And like part of what I think about like immortality is like one of the ways that humans throughout thousands of years have like coped with this idea is by creating immortality projects, where it's this idea of like, hey, even if I die, I'm going to leave a piece of me or what I believe in or what I stand in on earth. This is why all the dictators and all the people in the government, that's why like they all made statues, they made monuments, people write books, people start foundations, trust funds, so I think that like we all have like this underlying sort of thing happening in our psyche, but like just nobody talks about it. And I think that fundamental lack of talking about it has created like a huge, especially in younger people, like a lot of them are not being raised religious. And I'm not saying being raised religious is a good or a bad thing. I'm sure there's pros and cons, but you have to have some kind of a story. Like you have to have some kind of a narrative about the afterlife. You have to believe in something, or else it's just like you by yourself. And like you're just like a sack of bones in a meat suit. Like you're just going to die. You're just going to wither away into matter and atoms and dust.
So it's almost like, because people who think about like what their immortality means, like you're talking about, like you can name college buildings after yourself, the statue idea, the books, the whatever, oftentimes we can say, well, that's a narcissistic behavior that someone has, that they're,
I'm sure
that
it
they're
is.
very focused on, well, they're not here anymore, but they've left this imprint on whatever, on society. You're seeing it not as that, more as thinking that way of, okay, what does that boil down to right now having a conversation, and how can I have the best impact without like, trust me, like this episode doesn't lead to you getting your statue, right? Right? Or you're
one day, I'm sure.
But that
An
is
NFT.
more the thought, right? The NFT, exactly.
Yeah. And I'm sure it is. I'm sure it definitely is narcissistic. Like I'm sure for sure a lot of people who made those statues and whatnot, I'm sure part of it was. But at the end of the day, it's just like, what choice do you have? Like you have to make a story, whether it's a religion, whether it's not. And like you have to create an immortality project. You could choose not to. My ego is too big for me to not let it. So, you got to choose an immortality project. And that may look different to you. But ultimately, it's just like, for me, the way that I look at it is like, are you just like a human who just like showed up and just like died and was just like a number? Or are you going to play a small role in being like a force of nature that pushes the earth and the universe forward? And I choose to do that because I've lived a life that was so meaningless. Like, for example, just to like go super deep, I don't know if you want to talk about this, about the whole mass shootings thing. This is just my opinions. One of the things that I think really helped me cope with like all these mass shootings that are happening, it's literally so terrible, is like why it happens, right? So there's 1,000 different theories online and, was this person on this drug or this and that? What I like at a very base level, what I believe is that when I was suicidal, okay, I was very nihilistic, okay, which means that you have a very dark perception of life. You think that life has no meaning. Who cares if this person does that and this person does this and that and this and this? It's a very like modern view on how a lot of people unfortunately look at the world. And the unfortunate reality is that when you're living in that realm, there's still a part of you that understands that whether it's God, whether it's the universe, there is some sort of a higher order or a higher power that exists. And I think what happens is that you're sort of like talking to this higher power and you're like, hey, look at my life. Imagine like in the case of a shooter, hey, my mom is mentally ill. She beat the crap out of me every day. My dad abused me. I have no money. I go to school with these kids who have a ton of money and they bully me. I have mental health problems. I have physical health problems. My doctor said, if I don't take this medicine, I'm going to die. My family can't afford the health insurance. Like all these terrible problems that people end up having. And like someone's mental health and their state of nihilism goes down. So what happens is what they start to do is they say to like the higher order of the universe, to God, they say to God, you know what, bro? You made me like this. You put my life in this setting. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go and end life, what you love the most. I'm going to go out there and kill children because children are the embodiment of life. They're in the embodiment of the future. They're the embodiment of innocence. Like they don't do anything wrong. So when someone goes and they shoot up a bunch of them like that, what they're doing is they're trying to send a message to God, to the universe, some sort of higher power that they are so much in conflict with. And the reason why they do that is really like a terrorist. They're trying to send a political message of like, hey, my life was so terrible. So I'm going to go out and see 15 people who I literally don't know and kill them so that I can continue to start this nihilistic cycle of terror and trauma. So like personally, from like, that's what I believe in. So like, I think the whole immortality thing, it ties back to like what's happening in society. So like, I think that's a huge, huge piece of the picture that people are not talking about, that, also doesn't have an easy solution. But like, for me, in my opinion, like, that's what I think is like happening. And the reason why I know this is because I don't have like a violent bone in my body. Like, even if I wanted to, I couldn't hurt someone. And like, that's why when I was nihilistic, I was suicidal. So like, I was just going to kill myself. But like, I understand that mindset. To a certain degree, I've actually been there. Not like wanting to hurt other people or anything else, but like, I've been there. And I've had conversations with people who have been suicidal in the past, who have been nihilistic. We all understand this mindset, dude. Like, this is literally a spiritual war, so to speak, with people who are trying to fight the universe, who are people who are trying to fight God because they feel like they have been so damned. What do you think about that?
Man, the impact of like you sharing all of this, everything that you've talked about and all the different content you create. Like, I don't think it's like the guy at the mall comes up to you and you've changed his life. Like, that's real. That's 1-to-1. But there's other people in the mix as well. I kind of think like that's important, and that's going to happen. It's going to continue to happen for you. When you're not here and 100 years go by, 500 years go by, I don't think to you it matters one bit whatsoever that they recognize your name. Mark Metry is the guy that made the difference. Like that immortality thing that we're talking about, like you're pushing the universe forward because it will fade, right? There's people who died 500 years ago, like they had this impact, and I bet you we can come up with stuff, whatever that was. Like, no idea who that person was, never talked to him, don't know any of his family members, don't know anything about that person. Like, who's the person who started fire? Like, there's the group of people, we don't know the person's name that did it, right? And there are inventions that we learned about in school, and what did they, and I just don't think that it's about Mark. I think it's bigger than Mark, and you've made it bigger than you. And I think that is like what that has that impact, and you sharing the story on everything, because I've never been that way, what you just talked about. But to understand, like, you have to go to a dark place to commit that kind of heinous crime. And what is that like? We can study it, we can learn about it, we can ask psychologists about it, right? We can watch documentaries on it, but until you've been in that situation, you can't possibly know what it's like. Just to talk to someone that has been in that place, to been in that mindset and knows other people that have been there. What can I say to that except take it for what you shared with me and understand it and really like sit with it. And that's what we all have to do, right? Like, yeah, because it just like, there's no sense to it, but I don't know, man. Like I just said, maybe I should shut up because it just no sense, but
no. Dude, I love everything you said. I actually never thought about it like that. Of like, that's the difference between someone who is like a narcissist versus someone who's actually trying to move the world forward. Of like, they don't actually, at the end, they don't actually care that like it's their name or it's their, like, I literally don't care, bro. Like for me, literally all I'm chasing is just like that feeling of being a kid and being lost and then discovering someone's work that can help you. Like, I just want to create like that same feeling. And just like everybody who has had any of like relatively the same problems that I have had, because I didn't have that, And so for me, like that's the desire. Like it's to push that feeling. I don't care if it's my feeling or if it's like, I literally don't care what my name is, bro. Like literally, dude, like I'm the kind of person where like, if this whole content stuff didn't exist, I would not be on social media.
Right.
I don't even like posting pictures of myself. I'm not that kind of a person.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like I also am very, very, very motivated and passionate to, in my own way, help people and help change the world.
Yeah. You see the impact. And it's funny because like, well, that's great. But then why do you sell your book? Why don't you just give all this stuff away? And you do give a lot away for free. But that's where like...
You think I'm making $2.50?
Yeah. But you need... Right, exactly. and I think I even got it on Kindle Unlimited, right? But like... yeah. But you need the money to pay for the things that you do, right? Like you have lights, you have earbuds in, right? You have the place that you live in, the things that whatever those things that you enjoy doing, whatever that is, like so you have to cover those costs some way. And then people pay for it. And I think it's understood at a very deep level that if you do something that I can pay you for it and vice versa. And there's nothing wrong with that capitalistic approach to it to say, yeah, you profit off of these things. but it runs way deeper than that.
Yeah. Dude, I wish I made more money with my book. I literally wish, bro. I freaking wish, bro. I wish I made more money. I literally wish. And honestly, like, here's the thing that I thought about. Like, the truth is, like, you have to play this game. You can't opt out of it. Like, unless you're going to go and become a monk in Tibet like, unless you're going to do that, you have to play this game. And the reason why you have to play this game is because there are people out there who are bad people who are worse people than you, and they have more money than you, which means that they have more portable power, so to speak, to act on in the world. And like, dude, I don't know about you, but like, I hope to one day be so rich that, like, not even because it's my money, I like don't want any part of it. Like, I hope other people can manage it for me, but I hope to be so rich one day just so I can have like more power than people who I don't like, who have more money than me. Like, to be quite frank, because the way that they're changing the world, in my opinion, is not good. And if more good people had more money than the bad people that have more money than us, the world would be a completely different place. And like, that's just facts.
Man, yeah, you've just gamified this whole thing. This is wild. That's the simulation, right? All right. This has been a while. I appreciate all your time, and I hope we get to continue to stay in touch. I mean that, like,
for sure, bro.
I just enjoy talking with you. I think it doesn't matter if the mic's on. There's one question I got, and it just kind of like came to me here. And however you want to look at this, you know, sometimes I think back like what we all go through. And it's like, man, if you didn't go through that thing, you wouldn't be who you are today. And we've talked about this. But when you think back, and maybe there's a different word for it, but like, are you grateful for what you went through? Do you regret? Are you mad? Are you angry? Like, what is that thing? Because you wouldn't be who you are today. You wouldn't be helping people today. Like, you've helped me, just me reading your books and thinking through these things. And maybe it's helped my kids and all that. Like, with what you had to go through as a child, like, what is that? And again, this isn't like to box it up, because we've talked about that. We don't want to box it up because you can't. And this word and this thought could change over time. But like, as you think about it, like right now, today, in this moment, like, what comes to mind?
Good question. I think about this a lot. I believe that if you are like in the present moment and you're taking action on the things that you got to take action on every day, then like the way that life happens is the way that it happens, you know? And there's different times where I'm like, you know what? I wish I was born to rich parents and I could have just been one of those kids playing lacrosse who got good grades, you know, and I'd probably be like a pharmacist or a doctor right now. And I'm sure there would have been like pros, and I'm sure there would have been benefits to that. But at the end of the day, it's just like, you know, my life is my life. At the end of the day, like, I don't want to regret anything, because I know that regret is, it's like a poison. So I don't want to regret anything, but I definitely go through just cycles where, you know, where I'm like, man, I wish I was born as a trust fund baby. But then other times where I'm like, oh my God, thank God I wasn't born as a trust fund baby and I was born as myself. And oh, I'm so grateful I have like the story that I have. But then other times I'm like, man, I wish just everything could be more chill. And I could just like happen to like be born in like the 10% of the population that like doesn't have any kind of like mental health problems whatsoever. You know, so like there's different times where I wish and I hope for different things. And then there's other times where I accept and I'm grateful. It just comes and goes in different cycles. It's just part of understanding like I'm like an infinite character, you know? And so I'm always going to go through different feelings and thoughts. And it just depends on like what I identify with, you know? And so like for me, I don't identify with feeling regret or anything like that. Although when everything happened, like at the beginning of this year with my whole breakup, there was definitely, I spent a lot of time regretting things, and it's terrible. Like it's literally terrible. Like I literally had moments where I'm like, what the have I been doing for the last like 6 years? I don't think that way anymore, but there's definitely been times, dude. There's definitely been times. It definitely sucks, but I try not to get into like that energy.
Yeah. Mark, man, I appreciate it. One of my favorite things about CADSource is the opportunity to chat with amazing business leaders and entrepreneurs. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you want to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn or visit us at cadsource.com. Thank you for listening to this CADSource production, Entrepreneur Perspectives, building and protecting your business one podcast at a time.
Went all in, play my cards right. Up the ante, won blackjack all night. Roll the dice, let it ride. Water the odds, I got snake.
CADCM is our content production company. Why content? It's simple. Content brings people together. I've seen it play out over and over, and I want to help others explore and discover this for themselves. The experience is totally worth it. Learn more at kaztm.com. We focus on podcasts and writing, one piece of content at a time. It all starts with conversations just like this one.